Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you, Onyeka, and welcome everyone. My name is Morag. I am a senior program manager here at the Center for Public Impact, which we might refer to as CPI. We know we love acronyms. I am also part of the Global Development Initiative, which
Yeah,
we will
those are
also
nice.
refer to as GDI. And I'm just going to take a second to let you know what we mean. What is the collective? What is CPI's collective? And to start, I'm going to go back about 3 years when the Global Development Initiative was started. CPI has done a lot of work regionally, and the organization was really curious to explore what might working in complexity, working in systems, innovating together, really leaning on learning-oriented approaches. What might that look like in the global development space, and what could our role be? And we can share the slides now, Gabrielle, if you just take it to that second slide. We started off and we've done a number of projects. We interacted with a number of partners, and what we found was that there's a shared frustration. We held a level of frustration around the status quo. A lot of our partners sort of had an ambition to do things differently, but where can we come together in order to try, to test, to experiment with each other? We know that, there are multiple crises that are occurring. Our work is getting even more complex. And yet, there's that saying that we continue to do the same thing over and over again, right? The definition of insanity, and we expect different results. So how could we as CPI and the Global Development Initiative harness all of this frustration that we're feeling and move it towards action? How could we make it into something that's more positive and forward thinking? And so that's where CPI's collective comes in, and we can go to the next slide. We call this, or we describe this, a systems transformation lab, and we're trying to be as simple as possible in trying to describe what this means. And we really are bringing folks together, reformers together, organizations together to think, convene, and do differently. We have a number of folks who are on this call who are part of the collective already. You've already met Michelle and Onyeka. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that there are a number of other folks that over the last six or so months have come together, really believe in this mission that we have and want to test things and do things differently. So this is our collective community. So far, we have 47 members or 47 participants, fellows, who come together bi-weekly, and we really challenge each other to think differently, we convene differently, and we do differently. And I'm going to tell you what that means, right? Let's actually get into some of the practicality around that. And on the next slide, you'll see that we've created a nine to 12 month journey, and it's a learning and experimentation journey, up to 30 participants within one cohort or coalition, and they are convened around a specific transformation topic. So those topics could be specific to a complex challenge within a region. It might be a sector-specific topic that cohort wants to address, perhaps a development function, right? Like measuring systems change. What does that mean? How can we come together and actually um, explore how we can do that, right? How can we actually put that into practice? So we identify curious organizations, curious reformers, curious people who want to address those specific challenges. We use an ecosystem approach, so we try to ensure that we're including and bringing in as many perspectives as possible. Our hope is to go beyond what typically happens in our sector, which is sort of tokenistic inclusion, right? Instead, how are we sort of bringing each other to the same level and exchanging with one another peer to peer? And the third point here is to enable practical application. How do we test with one another? What do we know? How do we exchange, and how do we test with one another? And the idea is to develop experiments through this 9 to 12 month journey, in order to continue to test and adapt and move our work forward. On the next slide, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail by what we mean around think, convene, and do differently. So, through the process of this 9 to 12 month journey, we are looking first and foremost at mindsets and capabilities. How do we need to think about our work differently? What new mindsets need to be developed? How do we need to share those across not just the cohort, but our organizations as well? What are those enabling conditions, and how do we have the positionality or can create the positionality in order to shift those mindsets for ourselves and for others, our colleagues, our peers? The second is convening differently. We know in this sector, there's a lot of convenings, global convenings, regional convenings. There's a lot of talk, right? And we really want to shake the way that we've convened previously. What are some new ways to bring folks together and really move beyond talking, right? Or the audience just listening, and to allow it to be a lot more participatory. And then lastly, the doing differently. This is the experimentation piece. How can we create a portfolio of experiments around a particular topic that can be integrated and taken back to our work and applied directly? And last little bit that I'm going to touch on to give you an idea and orient you around what we mean by the collective is to give you a sense of what the journey looks like. So we have just completed phase 1 of our pilot. We had 2 different cohorts. One was measuring systems change, the other was decolonizing development. Those are 2 specific development functions, right? We have a third cohort that launched last November, and that is looking at innovation for democracy in the Latin American region. And in general, this is our learning and experimentation journey. We bring cohort members together or fellows together, and they get to really explore what is that vision that we can move forward, right? How can we further refine what it is that we want to accomplish collaboratively, collectively. Then we move into identifying what we call learning inquiries, which can also be known as or thought of as learning questions. As individuals representing our organizations or our work, how do we relate to this cohort vision? And how can we start to explore and interrogate our own relationship to this transformation challenge? Then we move into experimentation. And I should note that through our first phase of our 2 pilot cohorts, we got into experimentation, but this is really where we're going to focus our energy moving forward as we go into phase 2 of our work, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. But the idea is to go into building experiments, collaborate with one another. What might it look like to have collaborative experiments? How do we break down the silos that we are all so frustrated with? And then learning and sharing. How do we get this out there so that others in our network can learn from our learning, adaptation, and our in general commitment to doing things differently? So you'll see here that we have different types of engagement through this journey. And I have to say that one thing that we lean on quite strongly is that this is about emergence. What comes up, and how do we adapt for that within this journey, as well as us encouraging that our fellows do the same in the work that they are doing. So I'm going to stop there. I know this was a lot of information, but I promise that it's going to be a lot clearer as our team takes us through the rest of today. So I am going to pass it back to our session conductors, Michelle and Onyeka, to let us know what we're doing next.
Thank you, Morag. I think now it's time to see more in detail what happened with the collective. So I'm going to pass to Soumya, who's going to guide us through 5 examples of things that happened during this initial part of the journey during phase 1.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you all see my screen of this massive Miro board here? I saw a few thumbs up. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Morag, for introducing what the collective is. We hope that brought some insight into what we've been working on for the past few months, and as Morag said, for the past many years that we've been building towards this. But now we want to invite you alongside us on a similar journey to learn what we did at a more granular level. So I'm going to walk you through the 5 stages of our learning journey. And I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of all of these sessions that you see here because we love doing everything on Miro. I'm a huge Miro fan, so everything was done here. But I'll pause at specific moments to bring different cohort members to actually speak a little bit more deeply about when a certain session or a certain activity really seemed to speak to them and move them. But alongside those moments, we'll also ask you to reflect on questions in the Zoom chat as well. So look out for these messages from our fantastic tech lead, Gabrielle, who's holding it down in the back end. But we invite you to engage to the best of your ability. All right, ready? Off we go on our little roller coaster. So the collective's journey starts here in our, discover stage, in these orange boxes here. And I'm not going to zoom in completely just yet. I'll zoom in a little bit. But in the discover stage, as Morag said, we focused on exploring the cohort's topic a little bit more in depth to understand what brings us all together, to make sure that we have a similar purpose. But what was really important in this stage was deep relationship building. Any community cannot thrive without first focusing on the relationships. And so we used a community weaving framework, which you see here, um, in order to facilitate this. And you also see a bunch of fun icebreakers that we did. But Onyeka, I'm actually going to turn it over to you so you can speak a little bit to how the framework's fire that brings us together felt like for you.
Thanks, Somya. So yeah, I really liked this particular exercise because it kind of felt like a campfire. And if you know what I mean by that, it's like a fire burning in the middle and everyone's gathered around and it's kind of like a really intimate moment. And as you can see, Somya, if you just zoom into the 2 boxes beneath, first of all, we reflected on some of the intentions that we had coming into this particular cohort. So what does decolonization mean to us? That was our focus. But also, we wanted to explore why it's important to us and not just us as individuals, but also our work, our relationships, as well as society at large. And I think what really stood out to me is taking me back to sort of the philosophy of Ubuntu, which is like an African philosophy, which is I am because we are. It helped me to see that it's not just us as individuals or us within our own contexts or our own environments, but actually we're influenced by those within the cohort. And we as a collective actually had a shared vision of what we wanted to achieve, which was really interesting to see. So if you move to the right, Somya, you'll see that as well as our own individual learning inquiries, we started to explore what us as a collective were trying to explore together as well. Cool. Back to you, Somya.
Thanks, Onyeka. And I see there's a couple of responses in the chat. So if you want to keep bringing things up as things are coming out for you, please engage because we're sort of trying to show what that journey felt like for you, for us as well. Sorry. All right. So after session one, we already started seeing a lot of creativity and passion from the cohort fellows for the process coming to life. It was still quite emergent, but Michelle, after session one, ended up developing new ways of understanding what we were talking about within the session itself. So, Michelle, can you tell us a little bit more about how session one moved you to action?
Sure, Sumya. I think at the very beginning, we were a bunch of people from different backgrounds, different geographies, uh, different professional journeys. So most of the ideas that we were sharing were scattered around. So some of us wanted to do something very creative. Some of us wanted to explore the colonial roots of a specific institutions. So it was kind of quite hard, at least for me mentally, to find a connector or a fil rouge. So I started by developing probably in week 2 or 3, just kind of a simple way, kind of a heuristic, like a way to map out or kind of do some cartographical work to make sense around our collective and like the collective way of making sense of things. So here you can see on the mirror, it's just basically kind of a 2x2 or 1-to-1 metrical line or polarity. On one end, kind of elements about the past, on one end, elements about the future, and then there is kind of this middle ground. There is where kind of the present is basically mixed up with ideas about the past, with kind of aspiration about the future, and then additional layers about ideas about individual contribution. So you will see some experiments about the individual level, the self, ideas about communities, and ideas about systems. So basically, it was just kind of a way to have on Miro a place where we can kind of see and visualize or how all our perspective and ideas were actually coming together. So even if we were even coming from different perspectives, our entirety was making sense.
Thank you, Michelle. And we're actually going to, after this activity, go into breakout rooms for discussion. And Michelle's going to speak a little bit more about how this initial brainstorming and visualization turned into a whole experiment that he's started to develop. Fantastic. There's also a question in the chat, and I see some responses, so feel free to keep engaging here. On to the next stage, though. But in our next stage, which was our connect and ideate stage, these blue boxes here, and I'll zoom in a second. We dove deeper into our passions and frustrations for change to identify the questions that motivated us. We call these learning inquiries, as Morag was mentioning earlier, but we explored both what the group's learning inquiry was, what brought us all together. So sort of this initial part started in the conversation that Onyeka spoke to, and then also personal learning inquiries as well. And so I'm actually going to turn it over to Ratna here to share a little bit more about the process of identifying our group inquiry by really diving deeper into what decolonization meant to all of us in our Decolonizing the Development Sector cohort.
Thank you, Samia. As Samia mentioned, through her amazing facilitation skills, she invited us all to put down. You also saw Onyeka briefly give you a view of that, what decolonization, how we would define it, and also why it's important. So for me, this was really interesting to see all the different perspectives that people brought to this word or this umbrella term that was sort of defining why we were here and gathering together. And the broad range from what I would say, like linguistically, you can see the language of generation, more tangibly, land back issues or a return to indigenous philosophies, and moving, like people's definitions moved around a scale of internal inquiry, so thinking about decolonizing the self, to decolonizing systems of knowledge, decolonizing the way we indigenous justice systems, and also just it worked on multiple levels. As you can see, there's the psychological woundings of capitalism and colonization, and even kind of creating a space from where there could be a conversation between traditional practices and modern practices. So this like big brainstorming space, and also being able to see what other people were saying along with what each of us understood decolonizing to be, kind of really broadened the way we were going to define the issue, and then accordingly how we would then define our learning inquiry across different levels in relation to each other in the cohort.
Thank you,
Back to
Ratna.
you, Samia.
Absolutely. No, and this is a really pivotal moment for us because it was also a moment where we all slowed down to really just sit in this, and decolonization itself, the topic of this cohort, is very messy is not the word to say, complex. And so to be able to slow down and just sit in conversation was really, really powerful. But I also saw that it led people to think more critically about where they sat with it. And that helped them bring develop learning inquiries and define their personal learning inquiries. So Jacob, can you actually tell us a little bit more about what that process looked like?
Yes, of course. Yeah. No, this was in general, filled with so many collective and personal learning inquiries and opportunities. But I want to say hello, everyone. I'm Jacob, and today I want to talk about how we ground ourselves in curiosity. And especially as we're talking about here in these sometimes messy, interconnected spaces we call co-creation. Learning inquiries can be like our compass. They stop us from jumping straight into solution mode and help us ask bigger and deeper questions. Um, for me, and this was important to think about, and I have to make like micro, think about it like a micro level while I'm working, but it's like shifting from a let's fix it right now to let's peel back some layers, ask the uncomfortable stuff, and craft something genuinely fresh. It was liberating, but also like a little disorienting at first. It's like learning to slow down so we can speed up later, and that's critical in any type of work around collective impact. And so, few quick examples from the cohorts. Reshma's inquiry looked at finding equality and diversity and challenged a lot of Western frameworks we all kind of took for granted. And Michelle's inquiry was about visualizing similarities and differences across different sectors, just to break down mental models about how we think and we are in this space. And so, what I love the most is that these inquiries aren't just academic exercises that change how we collaborate. By saying, we don't know yet, we let curiosity take the wheel, and suddenly we're forging deeper trust and having all of these aha moments. It reminded me like that scariest moment, where like you have questions, usually, ones that we are set aside because there's no neat formula, and we live in a society where ever increasingly people are comfortable living in somewhat of a formula. But that's exactly where the collective and real innovation leaves, is outside of that space. So I'd like to invite you to think about one big question that both energizes and terrifies you. Maybe it's about equity, climate, or how to empower a certain community. Whatever it is, bring it forward, because that's the essence of these learning inquiries. And lastly, ultimately, like learning inquiries are catalytic. They nudge us to pause, see more clearly, and design more inclusively. They're little sparks that lead to real emergence. Teaser for later about emergence, but setting the stage for the kind of co-creation that we're all craving. So that's my thoughts on learning inquiries. And so thank you.
Sorry, unmuting sometimes takes so long, but thank you so much for sharing, Jacob. I'm going to zoom out now. And so, as we wrapped up that stage of connection and ideation, we zoomed in and did a little bit of storytelling to share tools, frameworks, and mindsets that have worked in the past to help achieve change. And we considered the story itself a tool, not the framework. And if you're really curious to hear more about what that means, we'll have a breakout room coming up in which Trina and Morag will be speaking a little bit more about that and with an activity. So very exciting for there. In our roller coaster metaphor, the next stage is the one with the more loop-de-loops. So this is the stage that was focused on experimentation. And in our own learning process as a CPI team, when we first started this phase, or when we first designed this process, we figured that people would be able to ideate and then get into experimentation over the course of these 3 sessions, which happened over the course of around 2 months. And we realized that was way too ambitious, and it was the end of the year, so it totally makes sense. And so we quickly learned that we had to rely a lot more on the emergence here, and slow down and follow the flow of what our fellows were actually saying. And in that process, what we ended up doing was actually diving deeper into not just our own personal learning inquiries and our group learning inquiry, but how we all ended up relating to each other and how our questions were so systemic. There were always lenses from one person's question that connected to another. And it was really great in one of the sessions where we had a moment where um, I think I think it was Ratna. I don't remember who created this framework, but it was just identifying different levels of the system and seeing where our learning questions sort of sat, where our experimentation sat at either a localized experimentation or a meta level more um yeah, meta experimentation is the way I describe it. And we had a really great conversation around how we could be supporting each other in this
Thank
process.
you. I'll text you. I just
No worries. Yeah, but we had a great conversation around how we would be able to connect more deeply in our own personal, again, these learning inquiries related to the things that we were individually passionate about. But to see that there was so much connection within this cohort itself was a really powerful moment. Um, but this phase was really focused on emergence. And emergence to me as one of the facilitators of this process definitely felt like I was stuck on the upside down part of the loop-de-loop of a roller coaster. So if you're curious to hear more about the embodied experience of emergence from both the participant perspective and the facilitator perspective, I invite you into the third and final breakout room, which again, we'll highlight these in just a moment, but we'll speak a little bit more deeply to the themes that are coming up here. Our penultimate stage was focused on synthesis. It was called our sense-making stage. What did all of this mean? Um, it was a really gratifying experience to hear from all of our fellows, but also for us to reflect on what the journey felt like and how this experience confirmed our hypothesis around the importance of a space like the collective. So in session 7, we did a whole mapping of our energy to understand how folks felt throughout the cohorts and or throughout the journey and what stood out to them. And then we tried to take that and turn it into our journey forward. And so we have all these really fun visualizations from Javiera thinking about what does the future look like and how can we co-create that based on the trust and based on the momentum that we've developed in this first stage. Um, I like one of the things that really stood out to me that I'd like to share is one person shared that they truly enjoyed this collective working experience where no one really has the answer, but we were all on the same path. And I think that was a perfect description of what emergence feels like itself. So, in our final stage, we're here with you, sharing what we've learned so far in an often siloed and linear thinking oriented development sector. We've really felt the collective to be a breath of fresh air. Um, we're bringing ecosystem approaches to reality, and those are all fun buzzwords, but in reality, we're connecting from all across the world. People who wouldn't have known each other um, before we're all co-creating this final session for you all. And so we still have so much more left to learn, to experiment with, but we're stepping into the next phase and future cohorts, reaffirming our belief in the importance of community, collaboration, and curiosity in navigating a development sector, especially in today's day that is undergoing so many changes itself. We have about 15 minutes, and I see a lot of movement happening in the chat. But I'd be curious if anyone wants to uh, come off mute, if anything's really standing out for you all. I can zoom to different parts of the Miro board if you're curious. And or the facilitators in the room, if there's something that you want to highlight from the chat or from what's coming up for you, feel free to.
Thanks, Somya. I just wanted to point out Giovanna's comment around the concept of buen vivere. Vivere, sorry if I pronounced that or butchered that. But I had a look, and it's when humans are regarded as only stewards of the earth and its resources, and we see ourselves as stewards rather than users and I guess dominators. And I felt like that was super important. And the point that was trying to be highlighted there is that it's so important in development, and it's not rightly regarded in that sense in development. And we need to embrace it urgently, is the point that was made. So yeah, I thought that was worth calling out.
Totally. And it's so great. The concept of stewardship, it's just something that we talked about in the collective as well when we were reflecting on what does it mean to be a fellow? It's not just a participant. And for us as facilitators, we're not just the people holding the container, but all of us are stewards in different ways. And stewardship shows up for folks in different ways. Not everyone is a steward in the same way. So we did like a fun personality quiz to get there as well. Giovanna, right? Do you want to come off mute and speak a little bit more to that?
Hello, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, great. I'm sorry, I'm in a cafe and it's a bit noisy. But yeah, I noticed you have considered this concept into your planning, and I think this is such an important point because um, I think it raises the attention of development not only as an economic system, but also an ecosystem that includes people, nature, and other kinds of knowledge as well. So I think the buen vivir is indigenous and local knowledge that we need to adopt into development studies and practices. So yeah, I was glad that you had considered this. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining. I see something in the chat that's really fascinating, and because perhaps it's one of the more later comments, that's the first thing I'm seeing here. But Kyle, your comment around avoiding the stage theory of mindsets, um, can you speak a little bit more to that if you're able to?
Sure. There was Nora Bateson made this very sort of provocative throwing down of the gauntlets about 2 years ago or so about stage theory being a modern day eugenics, this way of establishing that. And these arbitrary definitions of we're thinking one way, not another way. And we have a growth mindset. We are systems thinkers versus reductionist thinkers, those sort of things. And once we start to establish those buckets, or where we are on like a UX journey, or an AI journey, or whatever that happens to be, that will start to become weaponized as soon as we start to build those rules. And it was a sort of cautionary tale that some people are in a deeper crusade against. I'm okay to have the conversation. We need more rally points than divisive points, but I like the cautionary tale.
Absolutely. That's really fascinating. And it is a really interesting sort of there are the people I see in these spaces. There's something that motivated you all to join that I'm sure we all have in common, which is a curiosity, a passion around systems change, around emergence, around complexity, around community. And then there's other people who see that as not the way to move about the future, but we're all trying to define futures. And it's really what I find challenging is like there are a bunch of people who are not like avid on either side. They may not know where they sit. And so how do you communicate to these people when I find that some of this language sometimes, like we say sense making and systems change, and sometimes that doesn't relate at all. So that's a challenge that we definitely have, but we're exploring that.
I also wanted to point out a point made by Alan Hudson, I believe, and when we were talking about taking a broad view, but also holding a mirror up to ourselves and thinking about decolonization from the perspective of self as well as community and society. And he had a really interesting question, which was, I wonder how that differs between people from places or cultures that are colonized versus places that are essentially the colonizers. And I wanted to open that up to the group, the collective here today, to ask whether you have any views on that. It would be really interesting for others to weigh in on that point as well.
and Alan, you might be able to speak to this as well. I'm not sure if you've attended one of these, but one of the, and I'll add this in the chat, but and this was one of my first experiences getting into international development was with the Movement for Community-Led Development, and they have these hold maybe twice a year with these unlearning labs, and it's primarily targeted for big foundations, uh, to help unlearn those top-down practices. And I think that experiences like that that are open and collaborative, and there's there's a sense of whether it's brought on by somebody else or it's internal. I think there's always a sense of shame and guilt in a lot of people from you know majority countries, and so I think how you frame it is critical, and um unlearning is good, but like how can you make it so that there's you know a sense of uh yeah, like this is back to, I guess, shame and guilt, like removing that from that context, and focus on the learning and focus on the growth and focus on how we can move forward. I'll stop rambling.
To wrap this section up before we jump into some of the breakout rooms, we actually we have a video from someone who wasn't able to join. It's her birthday this week and she's out celebrating, but one of the collective fellows, Reshma Anwar, went through this entire journey, and she was the only person who actually completed an experiment over the course of the 6 months that we've been working on this together. So I'm going to share a little bit about her, and then a video that I recorded with her of a conversation of her telling what really this conversation on decolonizing the self is. So I'm going to share my screen again. Can folks see my screen? Okay, great. So this is a beautiful picture of Reshma. She is a development practitioner and a dancer, and sees the world through movement, and has facilitated development workshops and convenings through movement and dance. And through the collective, she was able to explore the intersection of her professional facilitation and dance further in a space that was deeply personal to her. She's a child of immigrants herself, and she wanted to explore how movement can offer different forms of connection to local and immigrant communities in her home country of Germany, and if movement-based community could help decolonize the mind, which would be the starting point for decolonizing systems, especially the development system. So I'm going to play a video. Ooh. You hear the audio?
So my name is Reshma Anwar, and I was born and brought up in Germany. I've been working in Europe mostly in the public policy field. I heard about the collective and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, and especially the topic around decolonizing development. I was focusing my studies a lot on international development, and I've implemented dance programs before in like Jamaica and Haiti. Also my personal journey, wondering about that question about decolonizing, also the self and the body. Yeah, I just wanted to meet people who are like-minded and who kind of like have the same question, come from it maybe from a different perspective, and learn from each other. So I feel like within the collective, the discussion points and the way we navigated through the journey together led me to start unlayering my thoughts. And that unlayering of thoughts ultimately led me to a certain learning inquiry, how we call it, to come at it maybe from a different perspective. Because before I thought it all needs to be it all needs to start up here with the system. And I'm like, well, but what if we start from ourselves? What if we start decolonizing our own ideas and how we're brought up? Because I have parents from an immigrant background, but I was born and brought up in the Western world. So I was brought up with a lot of colonized ideas, I would say, even in dance. So I was like, well, what if we decolonize the body and the mind first, and from these kind of imposed structures and ideas? And what if that could lead to ultimately a bigger change? With an increased number of refugees and asylum seekers, it's very evident that there's a certain cultural barrier that is clearly visible when you look at people on the streets or in the tram. And I feel like there's this cultural societal disconnect. It could make everyone more comfortable in the space that we're all sharing together. So I created an experiment with movement structures to see how we move in society. So I started with walking patterns, to have people first ground themselves, to have people feel themselves within the space. And then I started to open the awareness of the people. It's like, well, now look around. And then I started to guide them to start seeing each other. How is it to see each other and to purposefully look into the eyes of another person? It was interesting to observe who was starting, how did people communicate non-verbally, who took leadership, who took themselves back, who was more comfortable. We were all equal in that space, from my point of view. But yet we were in a certain context. We were still in Germany, in a space where there were majority Germans in that space. So I did see some behaviors that led to the people who were in the minority kind of like undermine themselves. So they were less likely to take on leadership. Even though I tried to create the space as a neutral space, it wasn't neutral. So there is still an imposed structure in there because of the context we're in. So maybe now I'm dealing with the question, maybe it isn't the body and the self that needs to be decolonized first. I think it's part of the process, but maybe it's not the first step. Maybe it is the system.
What your experiments are showing is that the messiness, the process part of it, not the outcome, as you mentioned, the process is so much more important, but that process requires so much unlearning and the right structures to be doing it in.
One second. Within our collective journey. And if you had the chance to experience our Miro journey that Somya took us on, you would have seen that one of our early sessions, I think it was session 3, really went into some detail around how can we relate to tools differently, right? I think one of the philosophies that we've sort of used as a foundation through this work under CPI's collective is challenging the overuse of frameworks, right? And resources. I think we often have a framework and we're happy because it means this is how you do it. You go from one step to the next. And oftentimes it really limits our ability to adapt. It limits our ability to think about what might be better fitting for a particular context. So just to give you all a sense of that discussion, we looked at the idea of stories or storytelling to create more active tools, right? We asked fellows to sort of think about a certain challenge that they might have had in their work and how they sort of enacted or were a part of change, right? How do we do change, right? We talk about it all the time, but can we stop and just think about what sort of mindsets were needed? Who did you need around you in order to move things forward? What did you come up against as you were attempting to enact this change. And it was really an opportunity for us to relate to our stories. CPI does quite a bit of work around storytelling for systems change. How can we start to go beyond the idea that stories are a communication tool that is used at the end of a project where we get those who were our targeted impact to sort of share how their lives had changed, right? Instead of sort of thinking about stories like that, how are we enacting tools, resources, our mindsets in order to move change forward? What are our own stories and how might they be supportive to others who are trying to enact change? So that's the general framing of how we think about tools differently in this work under the collective. And I can go into a little bit more detail, but let me see, Trina, timing wise, we can also just dive straight into the activity.
That's what I was thinking. That actually, let's do the activity first, and then we'll
And then
have
we can
plenty
have
of time to talk.
Amazing. Okay, so Trina's going to take us through an activity, and it's going to require you to all be very active and participatory. So we're looking forward to that. But we're hoping that this is more of an active tool. How can we go through this process? And I would invite you all to think about what your story might be coming out of this, right? So Trina, if you want to take it away, yeah, let's
Are
see.
people
Sorry, Trina, before you start, Morag, did you want to record the session?
Yes, I clicked record.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
is everyone able to see my screen share? Amazing. So we're going to play a game for the next 15 minutes or so. And this game is called the Dream Build. And it's one of my favorite games because it has no rules. And you can do whatever you want. Your only brief is that all of us here in the next 15 minutes get to build our dream community. As you can see in this community, there are some physical assets that you can build, like a prison or a hospital or a school, a park. And you can also build intangible assets, like social values, specific kind of social values, culture, so on. And how we are going to do this is I'm going to go around. So let's say I start with Morag. So I'm going to ask Morag what she wants to build, and she can choose either a physical asset or an intangible asset. And Morag, if you choose a physical asset, I'm going to ask you to tell me where you want me to put it on that grid. So say B2 prison, for example. And I'll put a post-it there for you, and then I'll ask Ratna what she would like to build, and she can choose either a tangible or intangible, and so on and so forth. Yeah? Sounds super simple. Great.
Okay.
I am obviously not going to start with Morag because that
Oh
would be
no?
too
Okay,
predictable.
fine. I'll go on mute.
No, you'll get your turn, Morag. But we're gonna do some surprises. Kyle, would you like to start us off? You're the first video on my screen, so why not? What would you like to build in your dream community?
A structure is what we're looking for this first item, huh?
So
Like
like
a
I said,
prison
It
you
could
can
be
asset,
choose
like
a physical structure or
physical
something
asset.
intangible
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
You know what? Let's do it like a venue, like a concert hall, a
A
musical venue,
concert
a
hall.
dance hall. Yeah.
Concert hall. I love that. I'll put concert/dance. And where would you like me to put it? On
Um,
the grid?
yeah. I'm sorry. The relevance of the grid is. Might have missed that.
So yeah, if you can just tell
Oh,
me
Tina,
just
can you explain
B2.
what the
yeah. So you can tell me like if you want to put it in A1 or
Yeah.
B4,
We'll put it in B2.
B2. Perfect. So pretty centrally located concert or
Yep.
dance hall. Love that. Nick, would you mind going next?
Sure. I would like to build a school, I think. I'm
And
allowed
where
to.
would you like to put it?
I would put that in C3, just on the diagonal from the concert hall.
Yeah, great,
Exactly.
excellent. Lily, would you like to go next?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I'll do a hospital and I'll put it on C4. Or wait, the school's right there. Maybe actually D4.
Excellent. Fabio.
Yeah, difficult, but I think I also stay with the tangible.
You'll get multiple rounds, by the way, in
Okay,
case you're
okay,
thinking you only
sure.
get to build one thing. Yeah. We have
Okay.
15 minutes.
No, but
We'll build a really nice community.
I would go for a park or forest, and I think I would also put it quite centrally, like perhaps between B2 and C3, right in the middle between the school and the
Like
concert.
this?
Yes.
Excellent. Carolyn? Sorry, how do I say your name?
Yeah, the second attempt was correct, Carolyn.
Carolyn.
I
Perfect.
would build a very large sun plaque, and I'll put it on A4.
Sun plaque. Am I spelling that right? Can you see that?
Yes.
Wonderful. And tell me where again you would like to put it?
A4.
A4. Here we go. Great. And Juanita. Juanita, are you able to tell us
Yes,
something you
I
want to
would like
build?
to
Okay.
do a community recreation center, and I will do it in C4.
Beautiful. And Morag, you finally get the turn.
Finally. I am going to put a working space, so like we work but not we work, that also has a daycare center. And I'm going to put it in hold on, that concert hall is very close.
Too loud for the babies.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, actually, I think Carolyn put hers in C4, right? I think
Carolyn, was that C4 or D4?
No, it's A4.
A4, you wanted it in.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my bad. Okay, I'll put it there in C4 then, between the hospital and the community rec center.
Sure. And Ratna. Oh, we've lost Ratna. Okay. We'll keep going until we get her back. So Kyle, we're back to you. You get to build the second thing.
Let's do like a let's do like a community kitchen or like a mess hall, sort of dining hall sort of thing, in C2.
And Nick, you're up.
Thanks, Gina. We can do intangible as well, can't we?
Of course.
Or are we sticking on the physical one? No, we can do intangible.
And we're going to talk about that after we're done here.
I'm not quite sure what. I mean, community spirit is too broad, but I would like sort of like events, like coffee mornings, if you sort of mean the things that are happening in the rec center.
Like community, shall I like community events?
Yeah, exactly.
Right here. And I think we have Lily next.
This is kind of general, but could I just do like strong sense of community for one of the less tangible ones?
Yeah, sure. No rules. This is your city. You can do whatever you want. But what would that mean to you, Lily, a strong sense of community?
And see, that's why I asked if it's too broad, because I think it means so many different things and kind of encompasses a lot. but I guess maybe the biggest thing that comes to mind when I think of strong community is just a sense of kind of respect for one another and lots of community services in place to ensure that a strong community can happen. So maybe we should have started with more of the infrastructure for that. But I think we've been adding to it as we
Yeah, and you have a few more rounds yourself. So, Carolyn.
So on tangible, I will build a wellness center.
And where would you like to put it?
I will put it on A3.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carolyn. Fabio.
Yeah, building up on what has already been said, but I think also for the intangible assets, I would put mutual respect, like a society being based,
Yeah, that is very much. I'm gonna put it close with strong sense of community.
Yeah.
Because I think, yeah, Lily meant something similar. Juanita.
For me, safety as the intangible, like
love that.
And I just put it in the center because I don't think anything is possible if you're not physically and especially physically safe or emotionally safe as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually make that poster a little big to make sure we've captured what you said, that it's really like so central and at the core for you. So I'm gonna make that poster a little bit bigger. And Murag.
Okay, I'm also going to do intangible, although I think it could be translated into something tangible or physical as well.
Sure.
But abundant economic opportunity.
And so does this mean jobs, or what does this mean to you, Murag?
Yeah, jobs, but also jobs not just in the traditional sense. I think, and innovative ways for people to maintain their livelihoods. So, the access and the ability to access, right? Sorry, I already said access, but the ability to access economic opportunity.
Yeah. And that could be, getting loans to be able to start a business, having trust in the community. It could be many things. Wonderful. Let's do one last round, and then we'll see how dreamy our community is. So, Kyle?
All right. Probably, I've got a few of them, but probably front of mind here in the States, we need a courthouse. And let's put that in like D2.
Did you say courthouse?
Courthouse, yeah. And hope the walls stand.
And where shall we put that?
Let's go D2.
D2. Yeah.
D2, sorry, like dog 2.
D2.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Nick.
Yeah, I was wondering about courthouse. Oh, but I won't do that again. I'm not sure what I would add. It's still on the intangible side. I feel we're a bit short on the intangible side. I think maybe what have we got? Strong sense of community, mutual safety. Something about I don't quite know how to express this. On the physical side, we've got it. On the intangible side, I want something about having fun together.
I'm gonna write having fun together.
Yeah. Joy,
Because,
exactly.
yeah, no rules. We can put that as a value.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that with community events. Group that here. And we have Lily next.
Maybe I'll add to less tangible and put resources for youth and mental health resources.
Sorry, Lily, I missed that, I think.
Oh, sorry, my Wi-Fi is a little spotty today. I just said maybe I'll add for lesser tangible, like resources for youth and mental health resources.
Mental health resources for young people. Amazing. Great. Ratna, I'm going to come to you in a second, but think of like two things you want to build. Okay, I'm going to give you two turns all at once. Carolyn.
As an intangible, I would want the forest of this community to give oxygen and permission for people to be authentic in their being and doing. I don't know how to put that in one word.
I think you're not saying one thing. I think you're cheating a little bit and saying many beautiful things. But let's put be authentic.
Authenticity.
Support authenticity. Let's just put that as a value. Authenticity is a beautiful value to have up there. Let's just a little bigger so we can read it. Wonderful. Juanita.
On tangible, I would like place of worship. And
a place of worship. And where can we put that?
I'm okay with somewhere in the A's.
Somewhere in the A's, sure. Here we go.
And then for intangible, hope.
Juanita, unfortunately, you are only getting one turn. But because Ratna had dropped out, she's getting two turns. So you get your place of worship, but that's it.
No problem.
So thank you for that. And Murag, your last one. Oh, Fabio, I forgot about you. I'm so sorry. Fabio, you go first.
No worries. Morag, you can also go first if you want.
No, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I would put security or social security, like health insurance, pension, support for families, etc.
Okay, and
For
Murag.
free, like not like, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think social security means free,
Yeah.
but I'll write it in any case.
Okay.
Yes, Murag, go ahead.
I really wanted to say a coffee shop, but it feels like that's not high enough priority, seeing as we weren't able to add hope. And I'm not even going to say hope. I think we should, I think human rights should be there as well under intangible assets.
Sure.
Basic human rights, or just human rights. Let's not qualify it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Ratna, you get to close us off. And I feel like Morag was trying to like manipulate you a little bit. She's like, I really wanted this
Nudge
other
me.
thing. So, in
Yes.
case anyone's after me, they can always get a coffee shop.
I'm actually going to choose for my tangible asset something inspired by what you have been doing, and a reconciliation center, community, like a place where people can come to work out issues or conflict and get a lot of support.
Yeah. Where can I put that at now?
D3 or D1. Nobody seems to have chosen the
D1.
one.
D1, very interesting. It's right next to the courthouse. So let's talk about what that means later. Pin that. You don't
Yes.
necessarily have to pick one physical and one intangible, Ratna. You can pick whatever you want.
Okay. I had to be hopping between breakout rooms, so I don't know if I deserve an extra.
You're still
If
getting
you
one
want to
less
give it
than
to,
you're
I'm
still
still
getting
getting
one
one.
less than
Okay.
everyone else. Everyone else got 3.
Got
So
3.
close us off.
Okay.
This is our final build in our dream community, Ratna. This is the one.
I say mutual respect and human rights, but I want to say something about living like with nature or cohabitation or co-respect with nature. And I wonder if the group can help me word.
Cohabit. What do we want to write? Nature
Nature
centrism.
Great.
Centrism.
Thank you,
Sure.
Mara.
Yes. Wonderful. Great. Now let's look at our dream community. Here we go. This is what our dream community looks like. So first question, and anyone unmute yourself and speak. How many of you would live in this place that we've built? You can raise like hand emoji, physical hand. Nick? Anyone else wants to live here? Kyle,
I'm
you would live
concerned
here?
about this like court and reconciliation center issue that's happening.
Yeah,
Maybe
let's
I'm
talk about
going to
that.
reserve judgment until I figure out
Okay,
what's going on
okay,
there.
fair point, fair point. And so for those who don't want to live here, why not? Everyone other than Nick and Kyle. A2 is a place of worship.
It says workshop right now. I think you need to change.
I'm sorry, that's a typo on my part. Sorry, it's the going between the Zoom screen and this one. Yes. So why do the others not want to live here? This is your dream community. You had no rules. You could build it exactly the way you wanted to. What happened? Why don't we want to live here?
I think it just needs more time to be workshopped, maybe. Add more to it.
Sure. And what do you mean by workshop? What would that do, Lily? Workshopping it.
Well, even just as I was thinking about putting myself in a community like that, I was like, oh, I think we're definitely still missing things because it's just been 15 minutes or whatever it's been. So just more time to add to it.
Sure. Sure. Others? Marag, Fabio, Carolyn, Juanita, how are you feeling about this? You want to live here, maybe a little bit not. What do you love? What do you hate about it?
For me, it's just like feeling a little bit, are we lacking imagination, right? Like ultimately, this is still a very conventional place. So, I mean, yes, you know, am I already living in something like this? And I still don't feel that I'm living in the place that that I want to live. So what are we missing? No, and I honestly don't know the answer either. But yeah, everywhere I live has all these things, and yet I still don't feel that I belong. So what is it that is that would change that? That's where I am. It's more my own, like, anyway, that's where I am.
That's beautiful, Vanita. And also, did someone leak the notes of this session to you? Because that's certain. That's
No.
one of the you're just that insightful. But I want to hear everyone else. But actually, one of the main things I did want to talk about, what my experiment was about, is how do we first change our imagination of a dream, decolonize our imagination of a dream community. Also, like simple things like, we start building at the center and slowly we expand outside, and people who come later don't have space to build. That is like classic colonized way of building, right? And we did that, right? So what would a decolonized way of even the process of building be, for example? So I do definitely want to talk about what would a different imagination be. But before we all talk about that, what else are you feeling about what you love, don't love about what we've built?
The reason I said I would like to live here, it has potential, and not because it has some of the core pieces. There's a lot of harmony here. There's a lot of coming together here, and so the mixing is there. What it's lacking is tension and divergence, but that sort of arises from the coming together spaces. And so that's where the potential is. The coming together will create the diversion and it will become character over time. So I like the trajectory of this.
Definitely. Thank you, Kyle. Javier, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, now of course, I had to think about what you were saying, and I'm now also
Sorry, say the
but
previous
that's
thing
fine.
and the
That's
new
fine.
thing.
I think I altered my answer. I would have given 2 minutes before now. I think actually, I mean, you're having really a point that we really filled the space. There's like not much left for folks coming or like having different ideas. Though perhaps there might be some chances to do it. like, yeah, I think before your comment, I would have said I would also like to give it a try, say for a year or so. But there are two things I found interesting. So the first, that we unconsciously kind of started with like the more tangible assets, the physical assets, kind of, because maybe it's more, yeah, maybe already the name says it, right? It's more tangible. It's more like we see it in front of us. And yeah, the second thing also, that we all have different understandings, I think, from what we put there, no? Like a park is different in my view vis-a-vis like someone else's view, right? Vis-a-vis someone else's view. So yeah.
That's such an important point, Fabio. And of course, like a park means different things for different people. And especially when we're talking about intangible asset, then even more people mean different things when we say authenticity or any of these things. But also when we say dream community, it means something so different to each of us. And we a little bit skip the process of talking about it. I know I said like, hey, Kyle, go first, Nick first. But there was nothing stopping any of us from saying, hey, like, I want to hear what the other person is saying. And also when I said, hey, Kyle, go first, Nick, go first, that didn't sound weird or strange. That just seemed normal because that's how we are used to working, building, dreaming on our own. Right? So changing our imagination of a dream community would also mean imagining how, like going back to like how we dream. So
Sorry, Trina, were you
yes,
saying that going one by one was what we didn't
the
question
process.
versus doing it as a group? Is that what you
Mm-hmm.
would imagine?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that's the other thing that was coming to me is we didn't like each person got to pick something, but the others didn't get to weigh in on whether like we didn't have to actually discuss it and decide as a group, okay, do I actually want that concert hall or not? Kind of thing. So Kyle was like, I want this, and Marag, it felt like what you were inviting us to do as a process was just step in one by one. But are you saying we could have asked to do it more as a
We
group?
could have, but I think yes, we could have. And I feel like none of us really thought about it. And I include myself in it because when I've done this the first time, not like I thought about it either. But more than that, it's like it didn't even cause us discomfort to do it that way. Because we're so used to it and we don't challenge it at all. And you know what I mean? Like it's such a it's so normative that it didn't even cause discomfort. It just felt like this is how it should be. Juanita.
I think when you asked us, will we live here, that raised the stakes. Otherwise, it was just a breakout room exercise.
A game. Yeah. Yeah. I like
Sorry.
throwing that one. That's Pana and Juanita.
Yeah, I was just even when I was thinking about the exercise, I was trying to get out of myself. Like, I am not a religious person, for instance, but I know that places of worship are truly critical for a lot of communities, especially in the global south. So it's also hard to be doing this when we are here all coming from different places. So I just came back from Colombia, and it's just a different society. So doing this exercise with a bunch of Colombians will be very different than doing this exercise in this kind of international community. So I think also it would have been good to say that what is the context before we would have started the exercise, okay? And just to try to get out a little bit of our own thinking, because all of us here are ultimately, we're speaking in English, we all kind of live in Western worlds, so anyway, that's something that also comes up.
That's really interesting, Juanita. And like, please all of you take this exercise. It's super simple. Please do it wherever you want. For to have this conversation. But Juanita, you're so right. Like every time I play this in a city with a beach, people will always build a beach. So right now I'm in the Indian city of Bangalore, and the airport is infamously known for being really far away on the outskirts of the city, and everyone complains about how long it takes to get to the airport. And every time I play this in Bangalore, people build an airport really far away. And I'm like, this is your dream city. Why is the airport far away? But it's because we build what we know. Because people who've always been in Bangalore think that that's where airports are supposed to be, far away from the city. So context matters so much. And therefore, I think that like this is a good reminder for us that maybe if we had discussed in the beginning, what would have been different if we maybe talked about our context. So thank you for that, Juanita.
Yeah, Sheena,
Yes, Morag, please.
we probably have a minute and a half left, and I love where this conversation is going, but I would also love to just maybe have a practical example, right? I know that you're working on a particular experiment, and I believe you've used this, right, in that experiment. So it would be great to just
Yes.
get like a quick overview of what you're working on, what your research is, and how this has been a relevant tool to actually use in that work.
Very much like Juanita was saying, actually, what would it look like to do it in Colombia? So I have been researching indigenous law and justice systems in India. And so I've been playing this game, for example, with nomadic tribes. And the reason the game works really well is because it's so accessible. It doesn't really need a lot of like literacy, reading, writing, or, even across languages, people just draw a house, they draw a hospital. And so I've been playing this with different communities, and from these maps, I can see how the imagination of indigenous communities is different. For example, nomadic communities never build prisons and courthouses because they have such natural restorative, integrative justice systems and practices. And so I just urge you to like even do this as a self-exercise sometimes as fun, to challenge your imagination, push your thinking, do it with friends at a dinner table, use this exercise freely, and just always ask how we could have take each thing and ask how we could have thought of it differently.
Thank you so much, Trina. And I see that Carolyn has her hand raised, so I wonder if you want to take the final word before we're pulled out of the breakout room.
Please, Carolyn, you have 10 seconds.
Yeah, it was funny that you assumed by either not expressing raising hand just by being quiet is.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you in this breakout group. My name is Aurélie, and I work at the Center of Public Impact, and I'm going to host this conversation. Before we start, Michelle, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Michele Adimasi. I'm one of the collective fellow. I'm working as a strategy consultant here in the UK, in London, originally from Italy, but also Congo DRC, but also Burundi, etc., etc. And yeah, so excited to be here.
Nice. Nice to have you, Michelle. Abdul, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Abdul Semakula. I'm in Kampala. My journey has been through, I started as a web developer and moved through to now regenerative development, but I've skipped a lot of portfolios there. Essentially, I'm rediscovering myself as a steward of our, or guardian of our biocultural heritage, because the name Semakula is from the Pangolin clan of the Baganda people, which in some cultures is known to be a guardian of the forest. So I'm rediscovering myself as a guardian of our biocultural heritage. Thank you.
Wow, how nice. What a powerful introduction. Thank you so much, Abdul. This is great. Well, it's very hard to make a transition after that. So we're going to talk about experiments, and hopefully you're going to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you've learned through the collective. So let me start by asking one of you to tell us about your learning inquiry, essentially the question you've come up with, you've explored through the collective. Who wants to go first?
Want to go?
Just say hello. This is Khan. Nice to meet you all. This is my first time that I'm joining such an event of CPI. So I'm just discovering and getting to understand the process. So I will be a little bit more silent and saying hello to you from Istanbul. There's only one Turkish participant in here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for introducing yourself and welcome. So and feel free to stay silent or not to be silent, to use the chat, to not use the chat, just go for it. Well,
Yeah.
Chucks, I see you've
Yeah.
your camera and unmuted yourself. So I think this is a
Yeah,
round of
I think,
introduction.
yeah, I
Go
think
for it.
he sort of gave me some motivation. I'm hoping you guys can hear me. I just unmute.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, he gave me a bit of motivation to put the
Perfect.
camera on there. So it's my first session joining as well. So I'm sort of taking it in and I'm listening to your experiences and stories and trying to pick up where this can be helpful in my journey. So yeah, I might be a bit quiet, but it's more so to take your advice and experiences.
Really up to you. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else who wants to introduce themselves? Yes, no, no? Okay, you can unmute at any time. You can also use the chat, so just go for it. Michelle, you were about to tell us a little bit more about your learning inquiry.
Sure. So I've joined the collective without kind of a learning inquiry, without kind of a guiding question. So I just joined without knowing exactly what I was about to work on. And then, so I've sure kind of the map at the beginning. So I started to think more and more about knowledge, about where, like the type of informations we are consuming and how that affect our decisions. So my kind of guiding question, my learning inquiry became, does the knowledge we consume, the sources of the knowledge we consume, books, movies, conversations, and so on, influence the decisions that we take, especially kind of in the working sector, development sector, and so on. And so I've been kind of playing around with this idea, and I think I will show you in a few minutes some part of the experiments I've been designing to try to answer this question.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Abdul, what about your learning inquiry?
Yeah, so I started with learning, like I entered the collective with the learning inquiry of my own, which has, of course, shifted in a way or scaled down in a way because of the engagement in the inquiry in the collective, sorry, to how do we generate or convene landowners towards a shared purpose of regenerating their place. So I was already working on a project around restoring a wetland, but also by bringing people together, convening neighborhoods to really co-create a shared vision and be able to regenerate the wetland, but also themselves. So it's a bottom-up approach rather than the colonial top-down process of development. And we want to center the Ubuntu cultural heritage. So really the inquiry is around how do we convene landowners towards a shared purpose, so that they can now be able to co-create a better future for themselves and their place.
Great. Thank you for sharing. I have lots of questions, particularly would love to know more about the Ubuntu that you're mentioning. But before that, I think a difference to notice is that you, Michelle, entered the collective not necessarily knowing what you were going to explore, what was the question you wanted to focus on. But Abdul, you already had a plan, right? You already kind of knew what you wanted to do. So Abdul, I would really love to know, like through the CPI's collective journey, how has your learning inquiry evolved, right? How has it changed and has it helped you to refine your approach?
A lot, yes. So This was always an inquiry, but wasn't so sure of how it would really run or go. And so during the start of when I entered the collective, the facilitators shared the way they were organizing this learning inquiry itself. And I thought, wow, I could also structure my inquiry in the same way. So how do we created also circles around learning circles around land use, around community development, around finance, for example, how learning how investors could shift the way they deploy money. So it helped me do that, like structure my learning inquiry. Then also in another session, we talked about entry points, which I also found very helpful because in another community that I am in, we were also exploring what we call KIS, so quick, inexpensive, simple, and systemic ways of really entering, now getting started, because this is a massive project. But now, how do you start? Where do you start? So you need an entry point that is quick, inexpensive, simple, but has systemic potential. So I also that was really helpful. Then also in one session, Morag, and this is the value of really collective learning. She was just talking, and I picked something that helped me to like scale down because I had this ambitious goal of bringing different stakeholders together in one room and stuff. But then as we talked through, I saw that it was actually first important to scale down and focus on the key stakeholder. Yeah. So which is the landowners, and align them to a shared purpose. And then that can act as the magnet that then pulls in other stakeholders to, co-create a regenerative future for this place. Yeah.
Great, thanks for sharing. And what is the scale? So what are you, where do you start? Are we talking about like a small place, or are we talking about Kampala, or are we talking about the whole country? What's the scale you start with? Not the ambition, the entry point.
Yeah, so there are so many aspects of scale that you're talking about, but in terms of scale, in terms of landscape, we're talking about a 1 hectare or kind of 2 hectares, which is around 320 acres of land, with around 28 neighborhoods that we are working with. So the first point, the scale down was really to bring, and hopefully in the next few weeks, we are hoping to organize that workshop where we bring the landowners who were already interested in collaborating. But of course, there are fears, lots of fears in their heads, of course. So fear about there are three: fear around the neighborhood, like neighborhoods fear themselves, but they also fear of the political system. There is fear of the financial system. So we will bring them together and align them to this shared purpose. Also to co-own this as their own. Yeah.
Okay. And maybe you want to tell us a little bit more what Ubuntu means?
Sure. So Ubuntu, in Uganda, it's called or we call it Ubuntu, but in South Africa, which they, I think, where it was most popularized, they call it Ubuntu. So to just I can share a small screenshot around that. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is Ubuntu. It's Obu has to do with, or it connotes plurality, and Ntu connotes individuality. So when you mix those two, you have a beautiful system that weaves the self into the whole. Yeah. And so it essentially it centers the interdependence of all life while uh, recognizing the what each individual could contribute to the health of the whole. So and when you compare that to you and contrast it with democracy, Western democracy, yeah, which centers people, you can see that we are here in terms of the poly crisis that we are facing because of we see only or we focus on human and forget the context, the environment in which the human is. Yeah. So basically, Ubuntu. Many people have different interpretations about it, but that's how I see it in terms of interdependence with the whole. And I think it also hints a lot on how human agency and purpose can come alive. Yeah. So the state tells us, or rather, democracy tells us that we are that if we exercise, if you vote once in 5 years, then you've exercised your agency and purpose. But Ubuntu and regeneration tells us that when you focus on your neighborhood or a place, that rather that it's around place or neighborhood that you are more likely to exercise human agency. And but there is no infrastructure for that. Yeah. For people to really contribute to the health of their place. And that has reduced our agency. Yeah. So that, I think, is also in a way feeds into decolonization. Yeah, I think I'm talking a lot. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. This is super interesting. Michelle, I want to go to you, but I first want to pause and see if anyone has specific questions for Abdul. This is beyond interesting, so perhaps also a lot to digest.
Not a question, but I would love to say, I just understand a little bit about learning inquiry. That actually from this collective, I think I will have I will get know more about best practices that is shared here, and also the impact reflection. I think I will have a lot, and as well as evidence-based decision making, and for future initiatives that I might plan with my team in our NGO, because we are working as an NGO in Istanbul, working with the youth sector, and also with the blue collars of industry workers. And I think I will get learning about those, and would love to say thank you to you because I will need to leave now. it's a little bit time up in. So thank you again, and
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining, and feel free to be in touch if you have any questions or if you can help you with anything.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Bye. Okay. Any reflections? No? No? Michelle, do you want to go next?
I have a
Sure.
question.
Oh, you have a question.
Sure,
I have a question. I do thank you so much for that presentation, and I really appreciated the images as well because I'm very visual. So I was like, oh, now I get it like so much better. So I super appreciate that. This is more like a general question, and sorry if it's like it lends like tough, but I wonder like for you, what defines an experiment? Like what's the difference between an idea and then like the idea being materialized in an experiment? It's tough, I know.
That's for me. An idea and experiment. I well, I I want to think that most of the things we do are really experiments. They could be ideas, but morph into experiments. It's just the way you look at it, because the experiment, so the grand experiment we are working with is around shifting land use. How can that happen in the context of, a sprawled a city that is degraded due to urban sprawl? That's the grand experiment. But also, so going back to the experiment or idea, whatever you call it, we want to call it, around shared, aligning these people with diverse interests, yeah, because they have diverse interests. How do we align them to a shared purpose? And I think the experimentation in that is around the process, yeah, of how that happens, yeah. And the idea is that aligning to a shared purpose. But I think the experimentation is around process, really. I think I'm rambling around, but yeah, that's my
Tough
thinking.
question. It's a tough question.
Yeah. And I think basically you said like experiment is action. Like you said like do, you said process, you said like moving people, just like do it.
Go for it, Onyeka.
Yeah, I had a thought that came to mind when you had the four different diagrams talking about Ubuntu. And I just wanted, I guess I was curious because when you said the bit where you have the most impact, but most people don't prioritize is sort of like local community rather than state, regional community. And I wondered whether that's also to do with like the status or like the prestige of both. I think when you get involved in even calling it bigger thing, it makes it sound grander than if you were to make real impact in your local community. And I wonder whether that had something like whether we've been conditioned to even call it smaller and greater in that sense, and whether you're exploring that as well.
Yeah.
Oops.
So that was just a thought. I think the slide I shared was thinking that I've been doing. Not really experimentation that I'm trying out, but it's interesting to bring that into experimentation as well. But yeah, this so the way I think about that is how close is, or how easy is it for someone to really exercise their agency, and what's the potential impact or influence of his or her agency on the whole, basically. Yeah. And so a vote that democracy tells us to vote once in 5 years definitely has, oh my God, I don't know, 1% of but my thing is that when you bring that closer to the person, yeah, to the neighborhood, to the place where they live, then the potential for his agency to have, impact is really more powerful, stronger there. I
Absolutely.
mean, yes.
Great. Thank you
And
for sharing.
then, sorry. Okay.
Oh, no
Time
problem.
is running.
I'm sorry for stopping you. I want to move on to Michelle because we
Okay.
only have 7 minutes left, and it would be great to understand a little bit more about your experiment, and perhaps we can come back to this conversation after. Michelle, do you want to share a bit more so we know about your learning inquiry? What does your experiment actually looks like?
Absolutely. Let me just screen share in a sec. Can you all see? Nope, not yet. Yes. Taking a bit to upload. I think it's probably kind of well connected with what Abdul was saying about kind of the role of perspectives and kind of bringing in stakeholders, and kind of I have always this kind of frustration about oversimplifying things. So kind of left and right, black and white, wrong and right, local as always good, international always bad, and so on. And so after a couple of conversations, the idea that came to my mind is, how can we find ways to better explore the sources of our knowledge, why we think what we think? And so I came out with this kind of small exercise, or like tool to run exercises or workshop, that I renamed yesterday. Carta is kind of a cartographical exercise around knowledge, with fancy word around it, but basically it's kind of trying to sketch out the sources of our knowledge. Bit of kind of assumptions. So we want to transform systems and change lives and do good in the world. But like the knowledge, the information, the inputs we rely on are often from the bubble we are kind of surrounded with. So what's outside our bubbles? Where can we kind of be more exploratory? Where we can kind of learn more? And so if you remember 40 minutes ago now, one of the activity in probably the second or third session for me was just kind of to try to create a framework to understand our point of views. And that framework became basically the starting point to my experiment. And I'm just skipping. And it's basically a 3-step exercise or workshop that can be done individually, but it's better if done in group or even like in large groups and so on. 3 steps. The first one, just kind of mapping out the sources of your knowledge. So think about a system or a sector or a topic you are deeply interested on. Decolonising development, maybe I should. List 6 or 7 things you know about that sector or system, and then 7 things, like 7 sources that provide you with the knowledge about the things. So maybe kind of books, maybe YouTube, maybe conversations, maybe directly your experience, maybe you having covered travels abroad, maybe you having watched a movie on Netflix, whatever. Just list down the sources of your knowledge. Then the second part of the exercise, now it's going to be a bit cut in the screen share, but I created this kind of system of categorization. It starts with 3 categories and can kind of increase. So think about for each of the sources of knowledge, the format. Is it something that is written? Is it oral? Is it experiential? Is it visual? Think about where in which language that knowledge is framed. Is kind of a very localized language? Is it your national language? Is a global language? And global, think about kind of Chinese, English, Spanish, Arab. And when was that piece of knowledge being created? So it's kind of live, 1-2 years, contemporary, 10 years, historical, more than 10, like 100 years. And then on this map, there is basically a polarity between dominant and peripheral. And I like this framing because in each of our plays, like the dominant voices are different. So if I'm going to go, say, in my own region in Italy, while on all the kind of decolonising development books, I will find white UK over 50 guys are the dominant groups. They are not in the countryside of Sicily. Or thinking about kind of gender relationship, thinking about connection with a specific culture or specific religion. In each geographical place, there are like different between the voices who are dominant and the voices who are peripheral. And so with this map, you can kind of map out where your sources of knowledge are coming from, and then make decisions. So whether you would like to explore things who are more dominant or peripheral, and if done in pairs or as a group, is really effective because you can kind of sketch the map out and then pass your map to the other participants. And the other participant is gonna suggest you, oh, actually, you are kind of consuming a lot of information from YouTube of video created in the last 10 years. What about exploring something from the 19th centuries and from this other geographical region? Or what about consuming the same content, but not in the video format, but attending an exhibition or theater or having a chat with someone? So it's basically proposing some ideas, and you can either decide to, oh yeah, let's explore something more, or, oh, actually, I would like to reinforce my current learning. So it's not prescriptive, it's just kind of a map, and you can decide your own journey, create your own adventure. Still working on that. Ideally, I would like to kind of run an in-person workshop here in London with kind of a bunch of people. And then, yeah, more things to come, like a chatbot to offer suggestions, or like a mirror or a mural, open source file, and so on. Cool, that was a lot.
This is so cool. And I think you give me so much to reflect on, because this week, particularly with what's happening in the world, I mean, let's put it this way, rather, over the last few weeks, I've been trying to force myself to consume different sources of knowledge to understand, to try to understand what's happening. And like, I really like this mapping. It allows to kind of see it. It's like something you don't necessarily think about, where your knowledge kind of like comes from. So it's really cool. I have a question. So ideally, who would you invite to be part of this workshop?
The more the merrier. So it has been designed to kind of being in this version as open as possible. So the 3 categories are just kind of language, time, and format. The things I would like to create, perhaps kind of over the year, is something kind of more specific, depending on which specific community or which specific sector is exploring something like that. Of course, kind of the more diverse the group in the room is, the better the stage number 3 is going to be. Because kind of, even like in terms of age groups, the suggestions about things that might be missing in your current knowledge menu are going to be kind of way broader and wider.
Okay, great. I see this is almost the end. So, does anyone have a question, some reflections they'd like to share? In any case, like I feel what you've shared is so also relevant to the development sector, as you know, I lived in East Africa for a long time and I didn't know about what you've shared, Abdul, right? But I know a lot about all these development reports, all this language, all this UN stuff. So it's yeah, quite something to think about.
And I just want to say that I really love the approach of like tackling misinformation through this kind of methodology where you're constantly like challenged and like, yeah, but what if you look at something else? And what if you're just like too narrow in your focus? Like, what does that other person has to say about it? It's just like a really nice approach. And like, there's no truth, but it's just like a collective narrative that we have to live in.
Welcome again. If you are not here to hear about what the process of emergence looks like, you're in the wrong breakout room, but I promise it's fun. It's uncomfortable, but it's fun. And so Jacob and I are just going to be chatting with each other. It's super casual. We have a few questions for each other and then a question for you all as well to reflect on. And yeah, we hope to just stay in conversation with you all. And hopefully, it's not just our two voices for the next half an hour or 35 minutes. Does that sound okay? Cool. So, Jacob, I'm going to throw a question at you first. What does emergence mean to you?
Yeah, so I was very excited to be a part of this conversation, and if I had to define it, I always want to have some notes to keep me from going off on too many tangents and asides and stories. But for me, like emergence is the process of letting solutions surface from the system itself, rather than forcing a blueprint from above. I've when I'm thinking about emergence, and what I've learned about emergence in different spaces, it's what it's done is it's really allowed me to be way more comfortable, honestly, because I have, there's this sense of like I can bring one if it's asked, but I don't need to bring any solutions. All I need to do is bring myself and be an active listener, have conversations and work with others to really define and see what this ecosystem or system looks like. How are we interconnected? How do we impact each other? And it's being comfortable, I think, also with playing what I call like the long game, and I think that is critical when we're talking about systems work.
Totally. I think that long game is really what stands out to me because I think the way I've just grown up and the way I've navigated my career and professional spaces too was very project to project oriented. There were X, Y, and Z tasks, and it's you know what you need to do. And but it's so short term of like, okay, this I know what's happening this week and I know what's happening next week. And I think we can mark our impact and like check impact in a few months and see what's up. When in reality, it's so much more complicated than that. And I think it relates to something that I always heard, not in the term of emergence, but the term of serendipity. And how, like, someone told me that your career will always be serendipitous. And so you just need to lean into that. And I think that's something that really what I try to feel when I'm feeling really uncomfortable in the emergence process. or not even a process, just existing, right? Like I think all of life is just emergence. But bringing that into the professional space can be really uncomfortable because you don't know, like designing this journey, there was a responsibility for all the cohort members coming along. I wanted to make sure that it was a valuable space. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't like that I kind of knew what I was saying when I was facilitating these conversations and not clearly like sweating my face off as I was from the other side of the Zoom screen. So I think that the serendipity of knowing that in the long run, things will work out, even if in the moment it feels deeply uncomfortable, is what I've learned to stay rooted in. And the last thing that I'll say here before I turn it back to you, Jacob, is one of my mentors told I was telling him about like, oh man, I've been facilitating the collective and it's so uncomfortable and I don't know what we're doing, like it's great. I love the people, but I don't know if I am facilitating, holding the space, being a steward well, because I don't know what the future looks like. And he said, that's when you know you're doing it right. Because that's what this process is supposed to be like. But Jacob, what has it felt like for you? Or I don't know, we can also have Jose come in.
Yeah, I would love to bring in Jose. And then yeah, I could definitely tell you guys how I felt. But yeah, Jose.
I have some question, guys. I'm just going to focus in just one, but I would like to know how much do you design or do you desire the future focusing on emergence? Because we don't know what is going to happen, but we need to start making some actions. Because if not, we are going to leave everything just for the randomness. So how the CPI do it? How design for the future that is unknown?
I can speak to that. And then Jacob, if you want to share like what that felt like on the other end.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, so what we started off with when we were sharing what the collective is to get people to come in, it was never like, hey, we don't know anything, join us. It was more like, here's a perhaps we like have 9 sessions planned out kind of based on our experience running cohorts in the past, holding learning spaces, holding spaces for community like this. So we kind of know that this kind of works. We don't know if it'll work in this case, but here's our hypothesis. But at the end of every session, and as we were doing different activities in every session, we would pause and ask everyone, does next week's session plan sound good? Does it not? Do we need a pivot? And that's why when I was talking about the experimentation phase as well, we had session plans designed around, okay, getting people from ideation to experimentation and implementation. But we didn't get to any of the implementation side. We just completely leaned back on that and then spent the rest of the journey feeling comfortable in the relationships that we'd built to build more momentum for a phase 2. And I mean, we asked people for 6 months, and like we were like, yeah, and we'll figure out phase 2 when we get there. But there was no expectation from folks. I mean, there's no expectation from anyone to stay at this point. This is all volunteer. But I think now we've gotten so much momentum and so much excitement for a phase 2 as well, because we were able to go on this like twisting and turning journey. Jacob, what did that feel like for you?
Yeah, yeah. You hit on the point that I was going to focus on is relationships, and building relationships, and this work demands like foundational relationships, and I think there needs to be a sense of trust and of course of letting go. I think what I to hit on a few other points that Samya spoke about, like this idea of serendipity. It's like when you're really uh, embracing this type of process and mindset, you find yourself in the flow, and when you're in this flow, things just happen, and you find connections, you have ideas, you have great ideas, you push things forward, and it's, to me, because of how much work that needs to be done and how much time it's going to take, every small little piece adds up and strengthens. I think thinking about strengthening the system and just speaking from context of the United States, I'll bring up uh, a comment somebody made. I'm from Texas. Yeah, home is Texas now, but grew up in Atlanta. But somebody asked me a few years ago when I was starting to do this work, it's like, why are you doing this work other places? Why aren't you doing this here? And there's communities that need this. And I think it's, there's you have to have buy-in for systemic change, because if not, we'll go through these same cycles over and over where we're having to, we might name it something differently, but having to do a lot of the same work over and over again. And it's relationships, trust, helps to build resilience, perseverance, which is critical. And you know, if thinking about how this process felt like for me, like this is how I think. I'm a collaboration first, collective first, and almost a purely relational approach. And any space that values not only collaboration but a sense of like letting go and letting the process just happen. Um, One of the most valuable experiences I've had in my life was teaching. I taught middle school science for 5 years, and you have to have that mentality and have to be able to feel the energy and sense what's working and what's not, and adapt and change. And now more than ever, like Jose, to your point, like how fast things are changing and how rapidly technology is evolving and systems are changing, and we're gaining more knowledge of systems. And so like we have to stay on our toes. Like if rigidity and complacency is going to perpetuate a lot of these challenges time and time again. Um, and so, Samya, like, you ask a lot of really great questions and are an amazing facilitator. And so I'm going to take the wheel just for a second, from the standpoint of CPI and as one of the facilitators of this process, what have you learned about practicing emergence moving forward? And yeah, what are some major lessons?
Yeah. I mean, it's uncomfortable is the biggest thing for me, but it is the right way, I think. Like that's what stands out to me the most. Because I've been on different CPI projects where we've been just like implementing, and there's a time and place for that. Like there's nothing against those projects. I love those projects. But I think like for what we've been building as a new global development initiative too, um, trying to find where we can add value in the development sector, but also broadly, like within CPI, like what does it mean for us? In like all of us are kind of in different parts of the world. How can we still contribute? And just seeing in through so many of our conversations, seeing how disconnected people are has been really eye-opening, and that what they don't need is a journey to, or like they don't need another class, another process to go through. We're not like theory absolutists. I really like to use that word. We're quite theory agnostic of like whatever framework works, works, but it is actually the power and connection and networks that is all the like all what's going to lead to lots of change. Um, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit here, but I also saw a question around measuring um, impact. And I actually, before Jacob, you come in on this, I'd love to um, or I guess Alan, you're here too, but actually Naije is in our breakout room and she's been sort of our impact lead for the collective. So while we have her here, I'd love to turn it over to her perspective of how her and then the impact lead at CPI, Pravalika, have done fantastic work on thinking about how do you actually measure what is happening and what do we think of as success? How did we co-define success? And how have we applied that? So not to put you on the spot, Naisha, I can speak to it, but I want to hear from you if you're okay.
Sure, I can hop in. I mean, the honest answer is that it's super complicated, and I think we're learning as we go. I think most people are really familiar with like traditional monitoring and evaluation, where you like have preset outcomes that you want to reach, and then you preset these indicators, and then like ideally your goal is that you want the data to kind of confirm your hypothesis and biases that like if you do X, you get Y. But I think what we were trying to do originally in this process was like, okay, let's take a step back, right? Like, what does it look like to maybe co-design outcomes? So like we really tried to lead into like a collaborative way where we were asking participants, what does success look like for you all? And that was like that played a huge role in what we defined as our outcomes. Um, and then beyond just like thinking about just like traditional numbers, right? Like not to say that there isn't value for them, right? But we were really interested in what does it mean to like expand our definition of evidence? Is there more things that we can find useful? Like what I guess the question we were asking ourselves is like, what would be useful? What do we want to learn? And then that was how we were trying to approach measuring impact. So like that might mean we're leaning more into like trying to capture narratives and like trying to speak to people and learning that way as opposed to like exclusively relying on like a baseline, a midterm, and a final survey. Um, so yeah, thinking about ways to combine different types of evidence and like really trying to expand what our expectations are, right? Like instead of I guess beyond, I feel like I'm rambling, my bad, Samya, but I think beyond looking at data as a way to confirm our hypothesis, really trying to look at it and see like, what if the data shows that what we were looking for doesn't happen? Does that mean that it's a failure, or is there a way that we can use the information to maybe adapt our programs moving forward? So looking at it from a learning lens. So that was how we were approaching it. I think we're still learning, still adapting to figure out how to make it work for us more long term, but definitely like an example of emergence and a stretch for us.
Totally. And Naija has been on so many different projects while also still doing all this impact work. So huge shout out to her from a capacity lens. Alan, I saw that you put that really fascinating comment in the chat around the quality or assessing changes in the quality of relationships. Do you want to speak a little more to that?
Yeah, I will. I wanted to pick up on something else initially, which was just to pick up on when Jose started off, and with the kind of general questions about emergence and about how it can be something which isn't simply chaos or randomness. And I think a good answer to that came, I mean, kind of in a very nice way from the collective intelligence of this group. So, what I was hearing is that emergence is not about chaos or randomness. Jose wasn't saying it was, but emergence isn't about chaos or randomness. It's about letting everyone, enabling everybody to shape how things go and to shape what emerges. So in that way, it's about kind of collective or distributed intelligence. It's about shifting and sharing the power, and in effect, it's about decolonisation in some ways. So I thought that's something that came to me, and I thought that was a potentially interesting way of looking at things. I'm super interested in whether we call it measurement or assessment or making sense of things, because I do I'm in a lot of conversations about emergence in complex systems, and sometimes there's a reluctance, an understandable reluctance on the part of an understandable reluctance to think about. I mean, certainly if you use the language of impact or outcomes, you get kind of frowned at and sometimes marginalized in the group, and I understand that. But I do think that it can be important to think about what difference something is making, or for instance, from the collective, are there examples of ideas and insights that have emerged from the collective that then people have been able to take away individually or collectively to change the way that they do things in other contexts? I think asking questions about what difference something has made, even what difference an emergent process has made, is very helpful. I'd love to hear. I've mentioned in the chat, Nigel, that I think it would be fascinating to learn more about how you and the kind of MEL process has supported the collective and supported the processes of emergence within the collective. I think that would be a wonderful set of insights and learning to share with the wider community. Just then very briefly, so I'm involved in some work actually with, I'm sure some of you have seen the new podcasts by Act Global on systems practice in international development, which is very good. And they've been doing some work in Nepal, and they are trying to think more systematically about the ways in which about the aspects of relationships that really matter to the effectiveness of a system, and how one might assess changes in those aspects of relationships and what difference that makes to the outcomes that emerge from a system. So, there's a lot there. I'm always happy to be in touch with people on those sorts of things. But what a great conversation. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sonia, for doing such a great facilitation job.
Thank you all so much for engaging. Oh, there's so much richness here. But before I step in, Jacob, is there anything that you want to respond to? Is there some things that are coming up for you?
Yeah. Like if I can add like just some final thoughts about like what I learned about practicing emergence in this space. And it's, I think, being in a space of consistent discomfort allows for so much growth, creativity, and surprises, beautiful ideas. And in that type of space, in any space where you're working on big ideas, systems work, you really have to nurture safety and authenticity. That's something, any space that I'm in, especially systems work too. It's safety is critical, because you're putting yourself out there. You think of yourself almost like as an artist. And I've learned this through conversations and now in experiences, and now I preface this before conversations with people about systems work or more complex ideas, is like, we're in sort of a dreaming conversation. Like we can add in practicality and we can be as real as possible, but we need to stay in a state of what is possible, and how can we understanding challenges but focusing on how we can get to where we want to get. And I think it all goes back to relationships. And when people are themselves and feel comfortable being themselves, they feel braver sharing half-formed ideas or failures. And so another one that we've sort of talked about, and I've learned a lot and become more comfortable with, is this idea of like slowing down to speed up. And we know what we know, and in spaces like this, you can, by slowing down a little bit early, you're able to move at such faster paces because you're bringing in so many different perspectives, experiences from around the world that will allow you to enter into that flow state. And then lastly, something that is a consistent practice for me, but especially with systems work, is continuously reflecting and having regular check-ins, not only with yourself but with people that you're working with. And if there needs to be a pivot, being open to that pivot. That's critical. And reflections, where you check your ego at the door, which is needed when you get into systems work. But that's where you can sort of figure out, hey, what do we need to do? What do we need to change? Do we need to make changes? And how are we going to do it? And let's do it.
Yeah. There's so much there. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most is that relationships piece. And I think it also like it so much ties into the way that we thought about the impact lens as well, as Alan and Jose were pointing out. I think so at a baseline, the three things that we were thinking about when it came to the success of the collective, which we had co-developed, was around learning, which, as Jacob said, came from a safer space for people to fail, was around experimentation, very similar to learning, and then around collaboration. And so we knew that we would have been successful if there were changes to people's behavior on these three lenses, um, both within the collective and outside the collective. But then what became difficult and interesting was like, well, how do you define collaboration? Like we would ask questions like, are you talking to people? Or that's not the right framing, but like, are you collaborating with people more outside of the collective, or have you like come up with a new experiment outside of the collective? And that's the difficult thing to see outside of the space. So I like sit at this like the thing that I wrestle with is maybe it's not making a difference outside, but this space itself is so powerful, at least for me. There's this embodied feeling when we're all in the collective together that shouldn't be discounted because maybe like for the rest of the world we haven't changed it yet. But like what does it mean for that space itself to be powerful? And so maybe there's like another x-axis, y-axis lens to look at it through of like the power in that. But like one thing, a realization that I came to quite early on, and thanks for joining, Jane, was the importance of vibes in this space. And like the better the vibes, the better the connection, and like at a very colloquial level. And the more the connection, the more willing folks were able to lean into collaboration, to lean into learning, and to lean into um, experimentation. But yeah, I'm gonna pause
And
there. We have about 7 minutes here, and there are a couple people who haven't spoken. Marisa, Jakob, I think. Is there anything that's standing out to you that you all wanted to speak to while you're here? We'd love to hear your voices.
Nothing for me at this time. I'm just taking it all in. I started at CPI 2 weeks ago. So I'm just here in a listening perspective and learning more about the work and the impact y'all make.
Yeah. And no worries, Jacob. Welcome to CPI, Marisa. I have a message to get back to you on. Anyone else? Nigel, Alan, Jose, questions, comments?
And one question is have any of y'all ever practiced emergence in your individual lives, both either, maybe personally or professionally? What are anybody have a story they'd like to share? Alan, I think that's where we first connected, was on that storytelling event. Uh, Potentially, it might be.
So maybe it was. I was just smiling at your question, Jacob, in that I don't see how one has any choice other than to live emergence. So then I was thinking. So then what is the question? So maybe it becomes interesting about whether one is living emergence in a reflective manner and with awareness of the emergence that's going on and one's position and contribution to emergence. So something like that, because I mean we have no choice other than to live in and with and be part of emergence. So yeah, and that also relates to the work that I'm doing with Act Global, where they're basically trying to help actors in the system, including the British Embassy, people at the British Embassy in Kathmandu, to kind of think, to kind of be more aware of how they are in relationships in order to, so that they can reflect on and maybe relate to people differently. So yeah, something like that.
And one thing that, this was an experience that, was an eye opener for me. Sort of like when I got into teaching, I thought, just kids are going to be maybe a little more kind to each other, but same dynamics to a certain degree. But it is, thinking of oh man, I blanked and lost my train of thought. But systems work. It's now coming back to me, but like thinking of what, how generally like the dynamics, thinking of younger generations, Gen Z and younger, there's almost this is just my observations and thoughts, is like there's almost a demand for emergence and, being able to see the bigger picture. And now I also now remember, it's all coming back to me, but thinking of yourself as a facilitator, that's what they, as a teacher, how my best classes, my best, lessons were involved. Like I did a lot of project-based learning where I could act as that facilitator and students own their learning. Same thing with systems work. And it's while we can be in these spaces and have, even though can be an echo chamber, it's a very diverse echo chamber. We're working against a lot of these old top-down practices that are continue to be indoctrinated for the next generation of people in international development. I'll give an example. I was at a Columbia grad class, I attended it virtually. It was the students' first time experiencing grassroots development, community-led development. And maybe out of like 20, 25, two could see it. And then the other comments, and I love being in the chat to ask questions and dig deeper, was, if it's this idea of like, if I'm a facilitator, is there as much of a need for me? Like if community-led development is occurring, do they need us as the foundation or in the NGO? And like, yeah, like as a facilitator, you can add so much more value, and it should release this pressure on your shoulders that you don't have to come with solutions. People know what they need, where they live, and they know how to get that work done. Resources are important. And, by having, experiences like this, and, like those unlearning labs, we can really start to propagate this sort of feeling of like letting go. And by letting go, it will allow more ideas to flow. And one final thought, I guess, is like a lot of times this work too, it's hard to find funding for. It's like I've written about this concept of like the dreaming phase, and how can you have some type of like collective funding efforts where there is money dedicated to that dreaming phase. Everybody's at the table, but that is just like you need to plan lessons far in advance, and a lot of things you need to have your ducks in a row, and have people be open and willing. And yeah, I'm rambling, man. I'll stop.
We have just we have 30 seconds and then a minute before the breakout room closes. But Marisa, you put a really poignant point in the chat if you wanted speak a little bit more to it. No pressure if not, but
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about emergence and realizing how, for me, it's a mindfulness practice of like you have to really slow down and be present and receive what is like coming up. And when your needs are met, it's so much easier to do that. When there are certain like positions you have in life, it's a lot easier, right? So I was just wondering, that's something I always grapple with, right? As someone who grew up holding a lot of marginalized identities, and has, mobilized to different space in life. And how did y'all navigate that? Was that something that was named and came up? Um, did it add tension? Did it fuel the work? Yeah.
42 seconds
So
is enough to answer that question, but I'd love to keep that conversation going for sure.
yeah, no, that is, we could have a whole room on that. No, I love that. Samia, any thoughts?
So many, I don't know. Like I'll start speaking a sentence and it'll get cut off. All that to say, I really feel that as an immigrant, and where it's hard to describe this process to my family. And so to have the trust of your community to go down this process is also really, really difficult. But that's only scratching the surface of everything that you shared. So to be continued. Awesome. We're, I know it's been a long session, but I hope you all had a fantastic conversation in the breakout rooms. We ended on this like big truth bomb question from Marisa, just as we were leaving. And so I know that we don't have the opportunity, even in 35 minutes, to discuss all the things that we want to. But as we wrap up this session, we have a few more things. We'll be having first Ratna come in and speak as our listener in chief. So as she's gone through this session, you might have seen her pop into the breakout room and out, and all she was doing was listening, not in a creepy way at all, but more to synthesize what's happening in the room. What are the vibes as I was talking about? And she is going to share that for a little bit. So Ratna, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Samya. I will say that I gave more time to one breakout room than the rest, but just to give an overall sense of what was happening across the rooms, the tools room was very interactive, where Trina invited us to take part in a little game together, while the experiments room with Abdul and Michelle was more kind of like a fireside chat. And it was really interesting. I heard them talk about how their different experiments changed as a result of engaging with the collective, and how their different experiments were on different stages and tracks in itself. And then their kind of intersection with the collective had its own sort of impact on the way they did their work. And then finally, in the last one, where you were, Samia, with Najee and Jacob, sounds like there was a lot of conversation at the meta level, which was more about how the collective itself was being created. I heard about the facilitation pieces. I'm sure, Jacob, maybe you talked about emergence in your experiment itself, but I didn't get to drop in on that conversation. But I ended back with Trina, who did an interesting sort of twist with us. The game was inviting us to build our dream community, and I think like little Zoom sheet, we kind of went around. Okay, let's like follow the instructions that Trina gave us in terms of like who wants to start. We followed one by one to build this community, and then once we'd finished doing a bill, Trina said, who will live in this community? And suddenly we were all quite hesitant because we're like, oh, this was just a Zoom game, but now you want me to live in what we created. And then we started questioning more deeply, like, wait, what does this community look like? And Trina also invited us that we hadn't actually questioned the process by which we had built the community. So we kind of just followed her instructions. Whereas we could have said, hey, if my dream community I would want to do this differently. Maybe I would want to be more collaborative or co-creative. Maybe I'd want to argue a little bit more with people while I'm building something that is so important. I think the point being with the exercise that we tend to follow in the lane that we know. And if we're trying to imagine or build a new community, then we have to start with questioning the way we think in itself. And I wonder if I could turn it back to some of the other fellows and ask if the engagement with the collective has destabilized or changed the way we think. That's where that's the prompt I will add back based on my listening sessions.
I'd actually love to respond to that. So I think before the collective, I was very much stuck in this loop of like trying to decolonize development in my work life. But the side of like decolonizing the self, the body, well, all of that, like well-being as a community concept, separate from self-care as an individual concept, like all of these were very new to me. So I think I'm very like it's not an overnight process, but the deepest thing I've taken away from the community is to say that to turn the mirror inwards as well and say what work do I have to do. And that's why I wanted to do this activity around questioning how we imagine and think, because that's turning the mirror inwards first. So that's been my greatest takeaway.
I'd agree with Trina. I think the biggest thing I've learned from being a part of the collective is that I have a tendency to move to action and kind of dealing with sort of work challenges on the side, as well as trying to be an active part of this community, has really taught me the balance of listening, like the value of listening, really, rather, sorry, not the balance. So the value of listening over the past sort of discovery phase, and how that really has shaped my work rather than the action that I was kind of proposing that I do from the outset. So yeah, I think it's caused me to reflect on that a bit, how we prioritize doing rather than listening.
I'm curious for some of the CPI folk. I know you all discussed that you all were emergent in the way you facilitated this as well, but did you find some of your processes changing or decolonizing as a result of having offered this in the first place?
I'll come off mute first. I think the entire team is smiling because absolutely, I think one of the unexpected experiences of holding the space of CPI's collective was the extent to which we had to be emergent. And I'm sure this was, this was teased out to a great extent in Somya and Jacob's breakout room. But, we had a plan and we were so sure that that plan was just going to, follow as we had intended. And we learned very quickly that we had to slow down quite a bit. And that required all of us to sort of challenge this urgency culture that we all work within, right? The complex challenges that we are attempting to work and solve are urgent, but the way in which we approach them doesn't always need to be matched with this, frantic, urgent energy, right? Like, let's just move without having the time and the space to stop and think and reflect and speak to others, bring others in. So that's one way for sure that I think we are continuously being challenged to decolonize the way that we do our work. And I could go on and on. We do have a blog post that lists a lot of our sort of learning from phase one of the cohort, which we'll put in the chat at some point. It goes into some of that. But anyone else from the CPI team that wants to speak to what happened for them?
I think for me, it's really the same. Which really struggle with this idea of having to slow down when, especially the world is moving so fast and pushes you, right, to prove yourself, to show results, impact, and but we also saw very quickly we needed to slow down, and I think Javiera will tell you a little bit more in a minute. But the cohort that started in November is a much longer journey because we realized we needed more time, and that's that's the way it is. So yeah.
I'd love to approach Carolyn's question in the chat because I think that's a really great question. You know, I think that you know everyone plays a significant role in systems work, and for me, my example is like there's I have ideas and there's experiments, but like where I gain the most joy, and Carolyn, you know this, we've known each other and had a lot of conversations, is I gain the most joy in network weaving and helping to amplify others' work or ideas, and sort of helping to sort of maybe be that person that looks from above, like a systems orchestrator type, and you know where I also I'm just drawn to these type of spaces where there's an emphasis on collaboration and learning, because I'm a forever learning and forever learner, and this I look for spaces to just practice being curious and have different and new experiences and meet a lot of different people. And so, yeah, I think for me, like my role was as one that wants to both learn and contribute and help others within the collective, which will then come back and help me.
Can I just quickly reflect on something that I learned from Somya? And I think it was probably in the second or third session. It was watching her sort of respond to indecisiveness or ambiguity. I think when I've been a facilitator in the past of sessions or in my work, when you see a little bit of ambiguity as a leader, you jump into the leadership role, which is making the decision. But actually, I think she imbibed the whole like ethos of being part of the collective as well by actually stepping back as the facilitator and allowing all of us to make a decision as to where we went next. And that wasn't something I'd seen before from a facilitator. So yeah, I really like that. So as well as learning from other participants in the collective, I felt like I was learning a lot about decolonization from the process and the leadership of the process as well.
Abdul, I saw you come off mute if you want to come in really quickly.
Yes. Yeah, I was reflecting on a question that Javiera asked me in the session, which is around what's the difference between an experiment and an idea? Yeah, and I think they are both the same, because I mean, even life is an experiment. You guys are holding an experiment, but it's also an idea, right? And I think it's all around, as long as it has these aspects of creativity, learning, and evolving and evolution. So, yeah, that's what I've been thinking around. I think it's intertwined. It's both, like an experiment is an idea. As long as it has those aspects of creativity, learning, and evolving.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your reflections and for just sharing the journey so far. Just really quickly, as Abdul was saying, experiments ideas are both the same. So we want to share more about what our experimentation looks like moving forward. What are our ideas, which, in all honesty, as we've learned, this is what we're going to say right now. You come back to us in 6 months, it'll look different, and that's okay. So I'm going to really quickly share my screen to share what's up next. All right. Can folks see my screen? Okay. Yeah, so there's so much that we're talking about of what we learned. Really, someone put this so beautifully in the chat, the slowness needed for noticing, and for see and to then perhaps act, but even just like noticing itself is a powerful act. And that like slowness was such an important thing that we learned about in our cohorts, which led us to creating new processes that were a lot more bespoke, new cohorts that were a lot more bespoke to what individuals needed. So we have a pilot phase, the pilot phase is phase 2 coming up. We're going to follow a journey that follows the pathways of each individual experimenter and their idea teams. Instead of going through this process that we shared, it'll follow individual pathways. But also, one thing that I'm not sure if it came up that much. Well, it's a collective. I'm not sure if community at all came up, but one of the things that we also realized that was hosting these spaces and building these networks cannot be an isolated incident or an isolated community of practice. When we're able to integrate this ecosystem approach into broader ecosystems, that's actually when we see so much more power come to this work. And so we're thinking about future cohorts, especially around climate and climate justice, from this lens of finding partners in different regions who are willing to work with us to co-lead these journeys instead of us just being the only people holding these containers. And the best example of sort of this, the slowness of the work that we've taken, the approach that we've taken, the working more closely and regionally in a space with organizations is actually a cohort that we're running right now in Innovation for Democracy in Latin America, and I'll let Javiera, the fantastic facilitator there, speak more to it.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And hi, everyone. Thank you, my voice. I'm Javier, I'm from a manager. It's lovely team at CPI. And as Sonia said, and as you all mentioned, there's been so many learnings in such a short time frame. And so what we're trying to do is to grow and adapt and learn with and from you. And now we have exciting news, as Sonia shared. We have a new cohort. We started working at the end of November, and it's called Innovation for Democracy in Latin America. And as Sonia mentioned, one of our biggest learnings was that we need a community, a strong one, strong bonds, and strong relationships in order to experiment. And for that, you have to build trust. And that means that we have to invest more time, we have to invest more energy in this. And that's why this project and this cohort will have a full year to spend at least 3 months building those connections in order to move forward to exploring, experimenting together. And also something that we discovered is how crucial networks are. And it's great to have practitioners who are just changing the world, but also having organizations joining us. It's really, really important. So what we're trying to do here is to bring a really like selective geographical scope, but bringing also organizations and individuals and academics together to build this together. So we're expanding this cohort, this group and clusters of innovation, then to connect globally. And more specifically, what we're trying to explore now is how can Latin America's democratic innovation ecosystem, all these practitioners and organizations unite to learn, to support each other, and also to rebuild trust with government and citizens while strengthening democracy. Why? Because there's been so much innovation happening in nations, in different local sectors, municipalities, but there hasn't been a lot of how do we do this together so we support each other as a region and we're able to tackle problems that are just beyond nations, such as, say, migration, climate crisis, and so on. So what we're trying to do here is to build on what's already there, these democratic innovations. In 30 years, there's been more than 3,000 democratic innovations created, different NGOs, government institutions, and so on. So we're trying to build a strong network there. We're bringing together key democratic innovations creators from LATAM to connect, to learn, to build new mechanisms to tackle these problems regionally, and to build strong networks to move forward. Part of these stakeholders, these participants come from civil society organizations, government institutions as well, innovation laboratories, academia, and also philanthropy. So we are very excited about this. Is this, again, 1 year journey? We are just starting the journey. We've had 3 sessions, but what's happening is just so lovely, so strong, and there's so much that we've been able to build on this new iteration only because we've learned so much in this 6 months of the collective journey with you. So just to say thank you so much, because without this, without testing and without experimenting, this wouldn't have happened. So thank you to everyone who is in this call. And please reach out if you want to know more about this. And I'm gonna pass it on to Michelle. Any?
Just checking Michelle's still there. Michelle, do you want to start off? Thank you so much, by the way.
Oh, my mic was just disconnected. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for having joined us today. We hope that this open house was a nice and interesting experience, that you have explored all the rooms and the spaces and connect with people. So we're going to drop a couple of links here in the chat. And the first one, if you, oh, it's right here. If you want to sign up and continue the conversation, the first comment in the chat from Gabriel is to, yeah, basically join all the news from the collective.
Yeah, and if you want to follow along for any of our learnings or just to find out what we're up to or what the different cohorts are up to, we'll also drop a link to the Substack. And if you're excited about participating or this sounds like your bag and you'd like to get involved in future, please do reach out. We'll leave the email address in the chat as well. Cool. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining. I'll hand back over to Soumya to close us out. But thank you. A Zoom poll should appear, but Soumya will tell you all about it.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for sticking it out. 2 hours, I know, is a long time, and we're all calling in from different parts of the world. So in this short Zoom poll, if you could just share one thing that you learned about the collective, whatever works for you. And I'm also going to really quickly share my screen and then share a final closeout slide. But I want to give a special thank you to all our co-facilitators on this call, Onyeka and Michelle, who were the session facilitators, Jacob, Abdul, Trina, who else am I missing? Orly, Javiera, Morag, everyone who were in breakout rooms. Ratna, who is a listener in chief, and Gabrielle, who was our fantastic tech lead. Couldn't have done this without you. And we hope that this was an enlightening experience. It was really fun for us to design this for you all, and we hope to stay in touch.
And as much as Somi is trying to leave on the final word, I'm going to take liberty and actually thank her for leading us through this entire session, getting us all together, getting us all prepared. So a very big thank you to you, Somia, and of course the rest of our collective participants and fellows. And we thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you, everybody. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.